Before I introduce Mr. Tolle, I want to tell you that we also have the editor of the Southsider Voice here today, Mr. Al Stilley. And for any of you who may be interested, he said he brought about 50 copies of the current issue of the Southsider Voice, which on the front page, he has written an article about our event, and it continues on page 6, so there's even more. So you feel free to pick one of those up outside as you leave, if you like. Also, if you came in and you should have gotten a copy of a schedule that tells you what's going on today. If you managed to sneak in without getting a membership brochure, you can't get out without one, because we want you to know how to get information about all the things we do. We've had a very busy year. This year we did a tour of the Waterman Building. We actually offered that twice. The historic Waterman Building on Southeastern Avenue. We've done a rummage sale. We did a trolley trip to Franklin to see Marjorie Main starring in a movie at the 1922 Art Craft Theater. Marjorie Main having been born here in Franklin Township. And we're doing this today, of course. We don't want you to miss anything. So please pick that up. She attended Franklin College, which made it even more appropriate seeing it in Franklin. So, at any rate, let me introduce you to Arvine Tolle, who is again, formerly preached at this building when it was a church, and will know more about it than I will ever learn in my term as president. Mr. Tolle.
Good afternoon. It's good to have you here, and on behalf of the Historical Society, welcome. And also, I want to thank Nancy for a brief synopsis of the building, and which I was not here when it was a wood building, because I'm not that old. But I was here as she said, it was 1871 when it was established. And underneath us is a hand-hewn basement. And on every Sunday of the month, when we were here prior to that and afterward, we would have a Sunday dinner, and we would go downstairs and eat. And there's tables and chairs down there, and it's probably a little bit musty by now, because it probably hasn't been opened up for quite a few years since. But anyway, and talking about the organ, it used to sit over here. And my wife played an accordion and piano and organ. And when we were here, Margaret Handy was, I don't know if any of you know Margaret Handy or not. She was a longtime resident of Franklin Township and a member of this church, and Aunt Corey and Jim and all of them. And so my wife, Sadie, would play the organ once in a while also. And it's a chore. It takes a lot of foot and leg pumping to do, and it be in coordination with all that and everything else. But laying all that aside, the church, it was an old school regular Baptist church, and you mention Baptists, and Baptists will eat any time you mention we're going to have food, or they're ready. But anyway, the church, it was first established, and thereafter, and in this building as well, we had circuit preachers. And how many of us know what a circuit preacher is? I think we all do, because we're from that era. And then they would come from around the whole state, and some of them even come from Illinois, Ohio, and Kentucky to preach here at the Big Run. And also, my twin brother, I have a twin brother, and his wife, her grandfather was Elder Blake. Why do we call ourselves elder? Because we were ordained as elders, because in the Bible it only refers to God as being reverent. And that's why we do not use the title as reverend. We are ordained as elders of the church. Because in Book of Timothy it says, if a man desires the office of a bishop or an elder of the church, so be it, and you know the scripture reading. But anyway, Elder Blake came from Oakland City, Indiana. That was his home-based church, and he would travel up here, and Elder Hardy did, and Elder Hammond and Elder McCamick. And Elder McCamick was here when I first started coming to Brookside. I had a church in the inner city of Brookside Avenue, on Brookside Avenue at 1700 East Brookside. And then they needed some help out here because Elder McCamick's health was not the best. And so I volunteered to come out here and hold services for him. And also, something unique about this church was they had fifth Sunday meetings. And so if a Sunday fell on the fifth Sunday, all the churches would come to one church because they didn't have enough people and preachers, so they all would come to the one church. And so this church was designated as a fifth Sunday church too, as Brookside was my church in Indianapolis. So therefore, that was a little bit of history of the preachers and who has preached here at this church. There's many of them, and there's a lot of fond memories. Margaret Handy, this organ belonged to the Handy family. Before she got married and everything, and Aunt Corey and everything, and that's where the organ came from their house. And but we had a smaller congregation, and then they decided that we couldn't maintain the building. And this was back in '78 is when I came here and preached for a year for them. And they somehow, I'm sorry, if they couldn't look outside the box, and so therefore they wanted to close the doors of the church. And so then Margaret got a hold of Sylvia, and she was with the Franklin Township Historical Society. Pardon?
Sylvia Hendricks.
Sylvia Hendricks. And so that's how the Historical Society got a hold of the building, in which we thank the Historical Society because they are preserving it, and it has to be preserved because it's on the National Historical Society. And but I enjoyed my stay here. The people were very affectionate and loving and Christian people, just as you all are loving and Christian people. And we thank you for your volunteerism that you do at your own historical places, and for your life. And if it wasn't for you, we would not have this day in remembrance to hold on to, and for you to carry on, you young people. And I'm 82 years old. So if you want to know what my age is, but I'm 82 years old. I'm not going to get old. I'm just going to get older. And and I still preach. I hold a service at Crestwood at 4 o'clock every Sunday, and for the people because they can't get out and they're homebound. And it was a blessing during the pandemic when we could get together. And we thank the Lord that we are here maskless, and some have masks on. I have mine with me. But you know, this too will change, and we will survive, just like we've survived the fittest thus far. And so may the Lord bless you. I do have something. I know we are not to have a church service here, and that's within the historical thing, but I do have a poem that I would like to read to you, if I may, if it's okay with you, Nancy. I do not ask God always to make my pathway light. I only pray that He will hold my hand throughout the night. I do not hope to have the thorns removed that pierce my feet. I only ask for His blessed arm, my sure retreat. If He afflicts me, then in my distress withholds His hands. In all His wisdom, I cannot conceive or understand. I do not ask to. I do not seek to always know His whys and wherefores here. But sometimes He will take my hand and make His meaning clear. If in His furnace He refines my heart into its to make it pure, I only ask for grace to meet His love, strength, and wisdom. And if fierce storms here around me beat, and between this all overcast, I know that he will give his weary one sweet peace at last. May the Lord bless you. May his countenance ever be upon you, is my prayer.
I appreciate having Mr. Tolle here because, people coming in, feel free. Just come in, grab a seat anywhere. I appreciate having Mr. Tolle here because when I first became involved with the Historical Society, and I've been on the board a little more than 20 years, I did not have any background as far as individuals involved with the church. So when he walked into our old-fashioned Christmas celebration about 3 years ago, I was so excited. I went, oh my gosh, an original contact, a member. So anyway, well, I have several things that I'm going to do right now. The first is that I'm going to immortalize all of you by getting a photo from up here of all of your smiling faces because we're so excited that you're here. There you go. Next, I want to tell you that in a few minutes, we are going to have a time, as you see on your schedules, and there's one minor change in your schedule, so I'll tell you about that momentarily. But we're going to have a few minutes for people just to browse the building and ask questions and look at things between music sessions and speakers. But one of our things that you can do, I have here this notebook, which is the Buck Creek Christian Church. And in here are amazing things, such as the final minutes of the church when they decided to give it to the Historical Society, and the different things like the celebration cards from the 100th anniversary of the founding of the church, which is, I think, seriously cool. And so many handwritten notes and cards and types and names. So this is here, and if any of you wish to look at it, that's right here labeled Buck Creek Christian Church. Yes, there we go, my brain. So also we have another photo album up here, which has some pictures, but rather than see them here, if you go outside during your break and look at the computer monitor, which is running on the table under this tent, all those photos from the church, from the era when it was a church, are running continuously on that in a video loop. So feel free to go out and see that. Now, there are aspects of this building that are still, obviously, from the days when it was a church for so many decades. And I'm going to point out a few of them. We've got your pulpit and podium here. We've got the original arch with the Bible open on it. But let me come down and pick up, we have several of these chairs, and I'm going to heft this up for those of you in the back. What I think is cool about this chair, this is a horsehair seat, as in hair from a horse. Yes?
And I've sat in those seats. They were back behind the pulpit.
Yes.
And this was all hand done, and the pulpit and the Bible was inscribed by hand also.
Oh, really? Wow. Well, at any rate, this is, Mr. Tolle is saying that this was all hand done up here. But the horsehair chairs, when we have students come, and of course in 2020 everything shut down, we weren't able to have school children come in, although our society did make a PowerPoint presentation and sent it to the schools so that the teachers could show it. So the kids still got some history from us. But the kids love it when you come in and you say, this is a chair and those are made out of hairs from a horse. They're kind of, oh, wow, that's kind of, our furniture at home doesn't have any pieces of horsetail in it, So that's kind of fun. This corner we have turned into our kind of a representation of a one-room schoolhouse. And when students come in, I tell them the truth about the requirements for teachers in the 1800s, which was that you were not allowed, at least in certain districts, to ride in a carriage or a wagon with any man who was not your father or your brother, because that would be unseemly. And if you decided to get married, you lost your job, If you didn't lose your job and you continued as the teacher, you had to be here early every morning to start the fire, to make sure that the building was warm, that you had to ring the bells for the kids when school started, when it was the lunch break, and so forth. Of course, we point out that you didn't get lunch unless you brought your own lunch in a little bag or bucket because there was no cafeteria. And then we always eventually have to get around to the fact that there was just an outhouse. So then our northeast corner has a representation of a Hoosier kitchen, and we have to explain to kids what life was like before the microwave. And in my years of working with the Historical Society, I've had some fun moments where I realized just how much time had changed compared to my own life. We were talking about the what is it table, which has items that kids are supposed to see if they can identify it. And one of the things about 15 years ago I showed them was a round rubber eraser with a brush on one end, which of course I knew from my era working on an old cast iron typewriter was a typewriter eraser. And so I showed it to them, they didn't know what it was, and I announced, it's a typewriter eraser. And they looked at me and said, what's a typewriter? Another moment was I told them the truth about our school teachers, that the teacher had to wear an ankle-length dress and multiple petticoats, because of course you couldn't do anything that wasn't very modest and demure. A little girl wearing her jeans and t-shirt put her hand up and says, what's a petticoat? So we have an interesting time talking to students today, and it's wonderful because each time something like that happens, it shows us what they haven't experienced and the things that we can share with them. And of course, it gives them a whole new angle on what life was like in Franklin Township. Be sure when you do wander around the building to stop and look at our model here. And there's a framed photo next to it. This is a model of the Franklin Township school bus. It wasn't called a bus, it was called a hack. And it was a horse-drawn school wagon. Students that lived more than a mile from school, in some cases, some of them you didn't have to be that far, would be picked up in the wagon. And if it were pouring rain or snowing, you can come in and sit down. You guys don't have to stay in the back. Just, yeah, we're laid back here. Trust me, if they'll let me be up front, they're not going to have rules about anything. The kids, if they were in the wagon and it were snowing or raining, they would roll down canvas curtains to keep the weather out. But of course, this is all great fun to students. So I am going to tell you about the slight change in schedule, and then I'm going to introduce Jim Kemp again to do more organ music. One of the things it says on your schedule is that William Mays will talk about his ancestors who are buried in Big Run Cemetery. But we have been unable to contact Mr. Mays. He had offered to be here, but we haven't been able to reach him the last 2 weeks. So I don't know if he's out of town or what, but so we will have a little extra time for browsing and maybe some extra time for music or getting questions answered. So in the meantime, Jim Kemp.